Opening slide graphic text. Enhancing Learning and Skill Development. Title, Session 1, The Importance of Developing Competencies, with Milton Tyree. Logos, Belonging Matters, talksthematter.net.
So welcome to our two-part Zoom on the series of Enhancing Learning and Skill Development. So this event is centered on things that have been helpful for me in teaching, principles and practices that have really changed my work and my life in general beyond my work. And I'm hoping that you find them and useful too. As Deb was saying, most of my career has been in the area of what y'all call open employment, what we call supported employment in the US. And because so much of my work has been in the area of employment, it's important to say that these same principles are relevant to people learning tasks other than those related to work, or in addition to those related to work. Its application and other dimensions of life. For instance, the same considerations are valid for people selecting and joining a fitness center, or joining a faith community, or learning to do things around the house. There are three additional things that I want to say about the ideas that we'll be exploring. The first is, it's not highly technical, and much of it will appeal to your common sense. However, it's fair to say that it's not common sense, or otherwise we would see it more commonly practiced. The next thing, the second thing, true for me with this content, and you may find it true for you too, is that it may be different than some things that you have studied and learned to do before. This certainly was true for me. I studied special education at the university, and then I went on to be a high school teacher in special ed. And then after that, before I worked in open employment, I worked for a while in a sheltered workshop, what you all call ADEs. And so what it is that I learned at the university and was told in special ed and did at the workshop, of that would be consistent, but some of it would be very different than what I've learned through Mark Gold and Associates in systematic instruction. So here's why I'm saying that. I think there's a natural tendency, if we hear something that's different than what we've learned before, is to dismiss it. So I would ask you not to do that. I would ask you to ask me questions about it. And what I want to do is not to try to convince you, but just to clearly explain the principle and its reason and my experience with it. So I welcome questions and comments, and I'll do my best to watch the chat window. As a matter of fact, well, I'm going to reposition that right now. Okay, good, so I can see it. Because what I want to do is clearly describe the principles, in other words, and of course you don't have to make your mind up on things today, but there almost certainly will be some things that will be different than what you've been told previously. It's also very important to say that the principles and practices we'll be studying are not only relevant for people with disabilities. They are things that are true for everybody, which is one of the reasons that this has been helpful in my life outside of work. It helped me teach my daughter how to drive, So as a matter of fact, I have people commonly say that, on workshops like this. Well, this would be really helpful with my teenager or my son or daughter or my partner or coworkers, whatever. And so really all of this is about teaching performance tasks and ways of teaching, like manner of teaching, relationship with people. We'll spend a lot of time talking about that. Right. So that's kind of an overview of what we'll be doing. And as Deb said, the two primary big pieces of my learning have been through Mark Gold and Associates and social role valorization theory. And you will see both of those presented in what I'll be doing today and again next week. I guess the final opening comment I would say is we're covering an awful lot of territory in less than 6 hours. And so it's important to understand that this is introductory content. I'm hoping that it whets your appetite to explore and learn more about what we call systematic instruction at Mark Gold and Associates. The first thing is just, why are we here? Like building on the stuff that Deb talked about in opening. 5 reasons competency development is important. And this is where we'll camp out most of the time, 5 things to know about teaching. And I'm going to start with just a brief overview on both of these topics so you can see where we're headed. So this very first point references a primary aim of social role valorization theory, people having access to the good things of life, especially for those whom this access is customarily denied. Also, image enhancement and competency enhancement are the 2 broad strategies of SRV. Our focus will be on competency enhancement as an essential pathway to valued social roles. Point 2 is that SRV's developmental model informs us that all people have vastly more growth potential than is realized. And this is, of course, especially true for people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. This understanding emphasizes our focus on competency development and its importance. People having the opportunity to give of oneself to others, to do something important, to have life purpose is also important for everybody. Another important reason for competency development. Because expectations for learning have often been quite low for people with intellectual disabilities, it's likely that many of the things they've been asked to learn and engage in doing are not suitably challenging, leading to boredom, low self-esteem, even life wasting. Therefore, the idea of fitting, suitably challenging, relevant things to learn, while important for everybody, or especially things that are important for people with intellectual disabilities. This last point of emphasis is found almost word for word in both SRV's developmental model and from the late Mark Gold in what he called the competence deviance hypothesis. The more competent an individual is, the more accepting society will be of any negatively valued differences. And then 5 things to know about teaching, just a kind of a brush stroke of what we'll be learning about here. This is a topic we'll come back to a good number of times because Mark just embodied this, the nature of a balanced relationship. You know, it really should go without saying that it's essential to know the learner prior to knowing what to teach, what would be relevant to teach. But also this piece of having a balanced relationship between instructor and learner. So we'll do some introductory kinds of information around discovery here as a non-comparative, non-evaluative way of understanding people, and then a lot about the nature of the relationship. Now, these next 3 areas, points 2, 3, and 4, are each essential aspects of a system of systematic instruction as developed by Mark and as has evolved over the last 45 years since Mark passed away. So point 2 is we'll examine the importance of determining a clear method for the task to be learned. You'll get to use your t-shirts for that. And you'll also get to use your t-shirts for this. Involving dividing a method into teachable steps for a learner. Now, point 4 is one we'll actually get into next Friday morning. This deals with the effective delivery of information from instructor to a learner. And then point 5, we also will dive into next week. I remember it's one of the things I read out loud that people were interested in. The final point relates to who is going to be doing the teaching and under what circumstances. When is it appropriate for human service workers to provide instruction? When would another person who would be typical to the whatever the setting is in the activity, when would somebody else provide that instruction? And what needs to be the role of the human service worker when a person who typically provides instruction is providing the instruction. So we've got a lot of stuff to cover in 2 sessions, and that's a bit of an outline of what it will look like. So let's dive into this a little more detail on this 5 reasons competency development is important. So we've said that so much of this work derives from the remarkable work of Dr. Wolf-Wolfensberger and SRV theory. And I know that you all have lots of opportunities for study of SRV theory. A bit more about this idea, this very first idea around competency providing a pathway to valued social roles. You know, if people just show up at the coffee shop or the bank or at work without knowing what happens or how to get involved or how to contribute to what's going on, then this just continues their devaluation, rejection, and isolation. So SRV informs us about role authenticity with these 4 characteristics that roles have certain behaviors, responsibilities, expectations, and privileges. So for instance, just a generic employee role, a highly valued role. Behaviors. You show up for work. You perform the agreed on tasks. You likely take supervision from other people while you're there. Responsibilities. Well, it's a responsibility to deal with other people honestly, to report your income and pay taxes. In the US, at least, that's how they decide how much we owe in taxes. And you got to report it. Not to steal from the company. Those are kind of the musts and the shall nots around responsibilities. And then expectations. We want work to be fulfilling and meaningful and purposeful. And so that's a perfectly legitimate expectation. But we also will expect that there will be some parts of the work that we won't like. And every day won't be a good day. And there will be problems and you will make mistakes. So it's kind of like all of that, all of that is kind of reasonable expectation around the role of employee. And then the privileges, hopefully you're many, that you have a fair wage and income, some good fringe benefits, paid vacation. Goodness, if you live in the US, that's how you get your health insurance. And then just the status, self-perception of others, like Deb was talking about, respect, status, social capital. So we all know, however, that valued social roles, like the role of employee or gym member or member of a faith community, may be new for people with disabilities. And they may not know what to expect or what the behaviors are, those kinds of things. And so this made me think of a very dear friend and colleague, Jo Mazzarelli from Massachusetts in the United States. She has this term that she calls being a friendly guide in a foreign culture, which is very, very much aligned with what it is that we think about at Mark Golden Associates in terms of the nature of a relationship. So, I mean, this is how she frames this. So when you're visiting a foreign culture where we don't have experience with the customs or expectations, am I supposed to take my shoes off when I enter this place? Do we initiate shaking somebody's hand? Is it different for men or women? These kinds of things we want to know. And we want to know this from somebody familiar with the culture, walking alongside of us, since we're new to the culture. And then for that person, just very quietly and respectfully, and only when needed, to kind of whisper in our ear, what's customary? How do you fit in? So here's how that relates to what we're talking about here. So SRV theory tells us that one of the common life experiences, one of the wounds of people is so often being deprived of experiences of the valued world, either through congregation or segregation or just having isolated lives. So in this instance, people may have become acclimated to behaviors and expectations that are really very different than those of the typical and valued world. So what's needed is a friendly guide in a foreign culture, in the typical and valued culture. That might be us, those of us who are professionals, in the field, or it might be a typical person in that setting, to help people know the score, write it ahead of time, sometimes in the moment, right? But the whole thing here is, that's a lot of the work to be done, I think. And so we'll be talking about a framework for this, obviously. One of the things that I've noticed is that when people are in a new experience for the first time, say a woman who's 35 years old and she's visiting a faith community and it's something that's new to her, and if she hasn't had a friendly guide in a foreign culture, she may show up and not know what to do or what's happening or how to get involved. And so often people will say, oh, well, it's because she has an intellectual disability. That's why she doesn't know what to do. The main reason she doesn't know what to do is because she's 35 years old and she's never done that before, you see. So it's like a lot of our work, with a lot of people at least, this wouldn't be true with everybody, but with a lot of people, it's going to be filling in the blanks of things that have been missed along the way. Human beings have vastly more growth potential than is realized for most people. And we also know the statement from SRB theory is true for everybody, but it's exponentially true for people with disabilities. And this is where instruction really is so important. Mark Gold put it this way. This is one of his quotes I know by heart. A lack of learning in any particular situation should be first interpreted as an inappropriate or insufficient use of teaching strategy rather than an inability on the part of a learner. The woman in this photo, Gabby, had attended a day program for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities after completing school. And so she recognized, and fortunately other people did, that she was capable of so much. And so she had to work with a woman in the process of discovery who learned about some things that Gabby was really good at doing and interested in doing, and helped her get some instruction at the community college and doing those kinds of things. And she ended up getting a customized job in this company, working as a digital specialist. And here Gabby is on the left with Christy over on the right. And you can see the list of the kinds of things that she learned how to do from Christy with some support from Mary Reed. So it was this figuring out of who's going to teach what and how to do that, which is stuff that we'll talk about more next time than this time. But just look at the task. I mean, just compare this to sitting in a day program. She does digital content creation and editing, Canva, Ripple, and Weave Video. She does social media scheduling. And then she did some various data collection kinds of things too. So the point here is to have high expectations that everybody's capable of so much more. And this is exponentially true for so many people who have intellectual or developmental disabilities. Now, this next point around just people thriving, just, our human spirit needs to be fed by opportunities to contribute. We are just hardwired to do something purposeful. And while this, again, is true for everybody, it's especially important for so many people with disabilities who have spent so much of their lives on the receiving end of help and have had to give something of themselves. So this is a photo of Donna, a woman who spent much of her life in a day program. Here she is, though, working as a volunteer in a nonprofit in Louisville called WaterStep. And what they do is they build water purification systems that are then taken all over the world so that people can have safe drinking water. So Donna assists with the assembly of these water purification systems, and therefore she has a hand in providing safe drinking water worldwide. That's important, and she knows it. And after this experience, and also after volunteering at a nature preserve, she refused to the day program. So this is something just to think about, people kind of a person of focus that you have in mind. How much do they have people doing things for them And maybe some of those things will rethink that people may do for themselves. Time, how much of their lives is spent with other people doing things for them, and how much opportunities does this person have to do something purposeful and meaningful and contributing to somebody else, a greater cause. People thrive on a fitting level of challenge. This is a very old photo of Shelley, a woman who used to work in a sheltered workshop, and she worked in a very early initiative. This was actually in the late 70s, initiated by Milton Associates, a very early iteration of integrated work. And she's seen here assembling an electronic circuit board at Motorola in Austin, Texas. Now, nobody wants to plug away day after day at a task that was learned in 10 minutes. On the other hand, you're asked to work for a long period of time with no success on something, then you feel like giving up. So, you know, it's this kind of sweet spot of getting to know people and figuring out what's a suitable level of challenge and how to give people really good instruction on what it is that they're learning. And you can see how Shelley is engaged in this task. All right, so we can think of ourselves even. I mean, we probably, everybody here has had a range of jobs. You know, you had a job where you learned all the tasks in a few days and then you were just never presented with anything else new to learn, right? So that was a problem if you've experienced that. And maybe you've had tasks before where you felt like kind of Lucy in the candy factory, you're always behind and you never quite catch up because it's just too hard for you at that point or time, or you haven't had good instruction in it. So these are all things we'll be trying to discern while we're supporting people with intellectual disabilities. Now, this isn't the best picture, but you all probably recognize who this man is in this picture. Stephen Hawking. He's an excellent example of this principle. The more competent an individual is, the more accepting society will be of any negatively valued differences, because for so much of his life, Stephen Hawking, you know, was dependent on other people for just about everything in terms of getting dressed and getting and eating, and needed to use simulated speech, all kinds of things that could cause him to be highly devalued. But his primary identity throughout his lifetime was being one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists ever lived. And so actually his ALS, or his Lou Gehrig's disease, was rarely even mentioned, you see, because his competence was so significant. So this is really true for people we support. You know, so for instance, Down syndrome, of course, is not in itself, but we know that it's perceived by the larger culture in a negative way. So the greater access people with Down syndrome have to develop their skills and abilities and competence, the less significant will be the negative social judgment.
Closing slide graphic text, with thanks to Milton Tyree. Produced by Belonging Matters. Belonging Matters makes every effort to provide accurate and up-to-date material. However, information is subject to change and our material is for reference only. This video was produced on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. This video was made possible with the support of an information and capacity building grant through the Department of Social Services. Logos, Belonging Matters, talksthatmatter.net.